Have you ever wondered why you feel so stuck in life? Like no matter how hard you try, you feel like you can't make it out of this place? Well, in this episode, I'm going to show you what's really keeping you from moving forward and also expose to you how God has already shown you the way out. A few weeks ago, my pastor was preaching on the story of Jonah. And as we were going through the story of Jonah, there was something that stood out to me that I never picked up on before. In Jonah chapter 1, God gave Jonah an instruction, which was to go to the city of Nineveh and announce his judgment against the people because of their wickedness. But Jonah chose to be disobedient and go in the opposite direction towards Tarshish. And because of Jonah's disobedience, God allowed Jonah to be swallowed by a fish. So in verse 17 of chapter 1, it says, "Now the Lord had arranged for a great fish to swallow Jonah, and Jonah was inside the fish for 3 days and 3 nights. Then in chapter 2, Jonah prayed from the belly of the fish, and by the end of the chapter, God commanded for the fish to spit Jonah out. Now, what really got my attention was chapter 3, specifically verses 1 through 3, which says, "Then the Lord spoke to Jonah a second time." This is after he allowed Jonah to be spit out of the fish. "Then the Lord spoke to Jonah a second time. Get up and go to the great city of Nineveh and deliver the message I have given you." This time, Jonah obeyed the Lord's commands and went to Nineveh, a city so large that it took 3 days to see it all. Verse 3 tells us that Jonah obeyed God the second time, and that this time when he obeyed God, the city was so large that it took him 3 days in order to explore it all. Now, this really stood out to me because it took Jonah 3 days sitting in the belly of the fish, and it also took him 3 days to complete the mission that God had given him. In other words, it took him 3 days to walk in the opposite direction of God, and 3 days to do exactly what God told him to do. When my pastor was reading the story of Jonah, the only thing that was going through my mind was Jonah could have been at his blessing. Jonah could have been got his breakthrough. Jonah could have been walking in his purpose, but he decided to go in the opposite direction, which cost him valuable time. Technically, it took Jonah 6 days to complete his mission because he spent 3 days in the belly of the fish and then he spent another 3 days operating in the mission. But if Jonah would have just made the decision to listen to God the first time, he could have cut that time in half. He could have cut that suffering in half. He didn't even have to experience that suffering, and he could have been walking in his purpose and the promise of what God said he was going to do in half the time that it took for him to actually do it. And so the revelation that God gave me is that your disobedience will cost you. This message is not for everyone, but it is for some of you. Some of us are in struggles, hardships, and facing obstacles. And right now, we believe that this is God's will. Right now, we believe that what we are going through is necessary because God is trying to do something in us. And although sometimes God does allow us to go through things to grow us, sometimes we have to realize that we make our own obstacles. We create our own hardships. And God is saying to some of you, what you are going through right now is unnecessary. It was not my will. It was not a part of my plan. It was simply because you refused to listen to me and be obedient to the instructions that I gave you. You are wasting time, and you're wasting even more time thinking that this is my will because it's causing you to get comfortable in this season. It's causing you to think, okay, well, God's just going to allow me to go through this and then one day he's going to bring me out. But God is saying what you're failing to realize is that me bringing you out is dependent upon you being willing to listen to me. Remember back in episode 207, when we talked about how many of us treat God's commands and instructions like they're optional, like they're a suggestion, like we have a choice in if we should do it. And so a lot of us make the choice to not do it or to do the opposite. But what we fail to realize when we make that choice is that we have to suffer the consequence of making that choice. We have to realize that we cannot want God results without first doing things God's way. We cannot go into our own direction and ask God to bring a result without taking his path. We cannot ask God for instructions, but then view it as a suggestion of if we should follow it. If we want a God result, we have to go God's way and do things the way that he told us to operate. And when we don't, we're going to take ourselves through unnecessary hardships. So we have to realize that we could have already been at our breakthrough if we listened to God the first time. God is saying you are misplacing your energy. Think back to the story of Jonah. The same amount of time that Jonah spent in the belly of the fish is the same amount of time that it took him to fulfill the purpose that God promised on his life. Some of us are so afraid to walk God's path. Some of us are so afraid to listen to God because we don't know if that thing is going to work out. We don't know if that thing is going to pan out. And what we fail to realize is that the same amount of energy and effort that it takes to be disobedient to God is the same amount of energy and effort that it will take to obey God. But you want to know what the only difference is between the effort of being disobedient and the effort of being obedient? The difference is the result. When you choose to go down the wrong paths and be disobedient to God, you are going to stay stuck in the same place. You are going to be in a worse situation. See, Jonah was living life, but when he chose to go into the direction that was the opposite of what God told him to do, he found himself in a worse situation. He found himself in a storm. He found himself in a belly of a fish. He found himself in a situation that he never envisioned would happen for him, all because of his disobedience. So when you choose to put your effort and your energy into something that God did not tell you to do, into something that is the opposite of what God told you to do, do not be surprised when you find yourself in a situation that was undesirable to you, in a situation that's the opposite of what you were praying for. Because God is saying, if you're going to do the opposite of what I told you to do, you're going to receive the opposite of what you desire to have. If you really want that breakthrough comes through my path. So you have to choose what you're going to invest your time, your energy, and your efforts in. And you're going to have to choose what result you're truly desiring to see. Because if you really want to change your life, if you really want that thing that you've been praying to God for, then your actions are going to show it. Your actions are going to show it through you listening to God and being obedient to his instructions. But you cannot say, I truly want this desire. I truly want this promise, God, that you gave me, but my actions are doing everything that goes against what you told me to do. So you have to ask yourself, what is your decision? Are you going to continue to pray to God over this thing, but do the exact opposite of what he tells you to do? Or are you going to fully surrender to him, fully commit to him, and fully follow his way? And if you are the type of person where you're thinking back to your situation and you realize, maybe I haven't listened to God. Maybe I haven't followed his instructions. Maybe I am the reason why I'm going through this hardship or this struggle. I don't want you to beat yourself up, because when we look at the story of Jonah for motivation, we got to look at the entire story. Even though Jonah disobeyed God, God still showed him mercy. In chapter 1 of Jonah, God gave him an instruction and he chose to do the opposite. So he reaped a consequence of an unnecessary storm. He reaped the consequence of being swallowed in a fish. But in chapter 2, Jonah still prayed to God for mercy. And I want you to understand that if you realize that you have put yourself in a unnecessary storm, do not be afraid to seek God. Because some of us feel like, what's the purpose of seeking God? I don't deserve your favor. I don't deserve your help. I don't deserve your blessing. I don't deserve your mercy. And God is saying, even though you disobeyed me, I did not forget about you. I do not feel like you have to go through this alone. I want to help you out. I want to redirect you back on my path. So don't be afraid to pray for me in the storm. If Jonah can pray to God in the belly of a fish, sitting in the situation that he put himself in, and pray to God with confidence that God was still going to hear him and God was still going to bring him out, then he is saying to you, do not be afraid to pray to me in the season that you are in. The same way that I brought Jonah out of a situation that he put himself in, the same way that I brought Jonah out of a situation that he did technically, some people would say he did not deserve to be brought out of, I will do the exact same to you. So don't be afraid to ask God for mercy, because what you will see in chapter 2 is after Jonah prayed confidently to him, after Jonah cried out to the Lord heard him and delivered him from his situation. And just like with Jonah, the Lord will deliver you from facing that eviction even though you didn't pay your bills. The Lord will deliver you from that relationship he told you to leave 5 years ago, but you chose to stay in. The Lord will deliver you from accepting that promotion that you accepted even though he told you to walk away from that job. The Lord will deliver you from not writing that book that he told you to write a year and a half ago. The Lord will deliver you from being in that situation because you refused to set boundaries with your family like he told you to. The Lord will deliver you from that situation and that hardship that you are currently facing because you chose to go in the opposite direction of what he told you to do. But here's the $1 million question. Once the Lord delivers you, what are you going to do? Because let's go back to Jonah chapter 3, verse 1. Remember that it says, actually, this is verse 1 and 2, sorry. But remember that it says, then the Lord spoke to Jonah a second time. This is after he delivered him out of the belly of the fish, after he delivered him from the hardship. Then the Lord spoke to Jonah a second time. Get up and go to the great city of Nineveh and deliver the message that I have given you. God showed mercy to Jonah and delivered him out of the obstacle that Jonah created for himself. But his instruction to Jonah after that did not change. It was the same instruction that God gave him in verse 1. And the reason why I want you to understand this is because some of us have been going through a cycle. Have you ever been in a season where you feel like you get up and then you fall back down, but you never move forward? You never take steps forward. You never experience more than this. You either experience this or you experience worse, but you never experience more. And it could be because you are not understanding that God's instruction to you is not going to change. You're still praying to make it out of this. You're still praying to experience more, and you're expecting God to speak something different. You're expecting God to tell you something different. You're expecting God to give you a different plan, and God is saying, my instruction is not going to change. So I want you to understand that once I bring you out of this season, once I show you mercy and help you come out of this hardship, what are you going to do next? Because I'm going to speak the exact same thing to you. So you have the option to either do the opposite like you've been doing and fall back to where you came from, or you have the option to obey me this time and start seeing progress and moving forward. In the Christian community, we love to say that God is going to take us through the same thing over and over and over again until we learn a lesson that he wants us to get. And for some of us, we've been like, okay, well, I keep falling back into this cycle. I keep going from this place back to this place, back to this place, back to this place. And maybe it's because God is trying to teach me a lesson. But have you ever thought, because when we think about the lesson, we think about, the lesson being removing a person out of our life or, helping us grow or something. Have you ever thought that maybe the lesson God wants to teach you is how to listen to him? Maybe the lesson that God wants to teach you is how to follow him. Maybe the lesson that God wants to teach you is how to obey him the first time. Because maybe he's saying to you that in this season that you are praying for me to take you to, there's going to be times where you really have to listen to me. We don't have time for you to disobey time and time and time again. We don't have time for you to wait on me to confirm it 7 different times. When I speak that thing to you, I just need you to learn how to just move. That is required of you in this next season that you are praying for me to take you to. And so until you get to that place where you can just boldly, confidently believe me and listen to me and obey me and do what I tell you to do without questioning it, without doubting it, without going the opposite way, without treating it like a suggestion, until you can get to that place, I can't deliver you to it. Maybe you're stuck here because God wants you to start working on your surrender. You are going to be in this place until you start listening to what God told you to do. Jonah disobeyed God. Jonah suffered a consequence. Jonah got shown mercy, but then he got up and he did something different. Have you ever heard the saying that you can't keep doing the same thing and expecting a different result? You can't keep disobeying God, but then expecting the result of seeing God's hand move in your life. Jonah made the decision to get up and do what God told him to do. So the question to you is, what decision are you going to make this time? If you don't take anything away from this episode, I want you to understand that disobedience will always cost you. And if you don't believe me, look at the story of Jonah. Because Jonah spent 3 days in the belly of a fish when it would have took him only 3 days to complete the mission that God gave him. He could have been done with what God told him in half the time if he would have just listened to God the first time. Your disobedience will cost you, and it will put you through seasons that God never intended for you to go through. But don't get discouraged in those seasons, because God can still show you mercy. And when he does show you mercy, you must realize that God's instructions will never change. So you have to ask yourself, when he brings you out, what are you going to do this time? Are you going to do the same thing that you've been doing, that's been putting you in the same obstacles, putting you in the same storms and hardships? Or are you finally going to listen to the one instruction that God has been giving you all along? The choice is yours, and I hope you make the right one. But that is all that I have for you today. Before we go, of course, I have an action step that I want to give you. So sometime this week, I want you to take one instruction that God has already given you and obey it fully. Write it down, pray over it, and take one actionable step towards it this week. But that is all that I have for you today. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure that you subscribe so that you get a notification every time a new episode is released. Also, leave a review and let me and others know how you enjoyed the show. And if you want to stay connected, follow me on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook at Prospering with Christ. But that's all I have for you today, and I will see you next week.